Right, we're ready to go. Hello everyone, this is our next Practical Emotional Intelligence webinar, Step 2, Self-Management. And this follows on from last month's, which was on self-analysis. And let's look at the agenda for the day. What we're going to talk about is emotional intelligence and our new technology for analyzing people's temperament, the 7MTF. Then I'm going to look at some examples of classic emotional intelligence advice, how to achieve the self-management stage. And then I'm going to go into detail how I think you should do it using two techniques. One I call hot buttons and the other habits for self-control. So let's get on our way. Emotional intelligence, I think the easiest way of understanding what it is to use this simple 2x2 table, beloved by MBAs all over the world, where there's two horizontal axes, self and others, and two vertical, understanding and influencing. And last month we did the webinar looking at self-understanding, and now we're going to that was the upper left-hand quadrant, and now we're going to go to the upper right-hand quadrant today, looking at self-influencing, which is mindfulness and other techniques that we're going to discuss. And then the next 2 months, we'll do the two bottom half quadrants. Now, self-management and emotional intelligence, I think, was best described by Dan Goleman when he was actually trying to describe emotional intelligence itself. And what he said was he thought that self-management was achieved beautifully in an experiment study carried out by Walter Mischel, who was a professor of organizational behavior at the University of Stanford Business School. And he had two young daughters, and they were going to the local nursery school there, the Bing Nursery School. And what he conducted there was a study of 653 4-year-olds. And what he was trying to work out is how long who could delay and how many of them could delay self-gratification. And the study is famous. It's been repeated again and again all over the world, where they put a child on his or her own in a room, and they put a marshmallow on the plate. And they said, we're going to leave you alone for 10 minutes. And if we come back and the marshmallow is still there, we're going to give you another one. And what Mischel discovered is that 10% of the population carrying out the experiment could hold back these 4-year-olds. And that's what he wrote up. But as his two daughters progressed through school, he did what all parents do. And speaking as someone who's got two daughters themselves, you talk about how your child is doing, how the other children are doing. And then what he noticed was that over time, those 10% who could hold back were the ones that are getting on the student council, doing well in exams, going to university, getting married earlier, getting better jobs. And he then wrote this up about how those people who could delay self-gratification were the ones who were going to be more successful in life. And it was written up in a beautiful article in the New Yorker, 18 May 2009. It was called "Don't: The Secret of Self-Control." But this was published well after when he did the scientific papers. Anyway, Goleman used this. He said, this is a wonderful example of emotional intelligence, particularly the self-management step. And that's this ability to delay self-gratification. So, our theory starts off by saying people drive performance, very important. And then I totally agree with the next statement, emotions drive people. My big message to you is what drives emotions is temperament, your genetic emotional bias. Now, I'm the first to admit success in life, luck's very important, memory's very important. But there was a very convincing study done by King's College London of over 11,000 identical twins. And they were trying to work out a very simple question. What was your exam success due to? And they came up with sort of two great figures. 58% of exam success was due to your genetic makeup, i.e. your intelligence and temperament, and 29% was due to teachers and schools. Of course, the teachers and schools didn't quite like this result, but the basic message is that nature is twice as important as nurture. And that's the big message I want to talk to you today, is that temperament is your genetic emotional bias. And if you've got a good model of temperament, a useful, practical model of temperament, you will be able to lift your emotional intelligence significantly. Now, what is emotional intelligence then? Well, I say it's achieving self and social mastery by being smart with your core temperament emotions. As I say, today we're talking about the second aspect of self-mastery, which is self-management, and in the next 2 months we're going to do social mastery, empathy and social skills. And the big message to you today is that temperament is more important than your transient emotions. So, in the same way the Humm-Wadsworth builds on the work of Rosenoff, the 7 MTF builds on the work of Humm-Wadsworth. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And the big message is that when we talk about it, it's like Rosenoff's work, he started off in the early 1900s by coming up with 2 brilliant insights. The first one is we're all slightly mad, i.e. you're not sane or insane, it's shades of gray along a spectrum. At that time, it was a huge revolution in thinking. Of course, now it's the modern view. He also said that compared to the number of physical things that go wrong with you, there weren't that many mental illnesses. And what he said is, in fact, 4. And he described them as cyclodia, which is schizophrenia, hysteria, epilepsy. And then he said, in our temperament, he's trying to work out what makes us tick. There was a 5th component, which he called the normal, which acted as a controlling factor. And that was his model. And then Humm-Wadsworth in 1935 took up this model and using a new technique which had just been developed called factor analysis, developed the first decent personality test. And they said Rosenoff was definitely on the right track. However, there weren't 5 components to your temperament, there were 7. They split cyclodia into the manic depressive components, schizophrenia into autistic and paranoid components, and then had the histoid, epileptoid, and normal components, as Rosenoff did. And then what happens is in the early 1990s, I think it was 91, I published Empathy Selling. And I was told by the publisher that we can't use terms like manic, depressive, autistic, paranoid. He said they're too pejorative, and we had to change the terms. And I came up with the terms on the left-hand side. I was trying to keep the same first initial. So the manic became mover, the depressive became a double checker, and then so on, artist, politician, hustler, engineer, and normal. Then in 2007, I retired from venture capital and started doing more work on emotional intelligence. And first thing I discovered or worked out was, in fact, the mental illnesses listed by Humm-Wadsworth, in fact, weren't quite right. And that the hustler, in fact, was the antisocial personality disorder. The engineer was not based on epilepsy, but obsessive compulsive disorder. And normal wasn't basically normal. Normal was someone who was low in neuroticism. So that was the new illnesses. The other 4 stayed the same. And then I started doing some work in the States with a gentleman called Bruce Lewald, and he said, look, some of these terms have different meanings in America, and he wanted to change some of them. So as you can see, we kept 4, double checker, artist, politician, engineer, but we changed mover to socializer, a hustler to a go-getter, and a normal to a regulator. So what we're going to do today is now whip through the 7 of them, just give you a quick overview, and then talk about the rest of the agenda, as I said earlier. So let's talk about them. Go-getters are driven by the desire for material success. Self-interest completely dominates them. They listen to one radio station. What is it? What's in it for me? And these people are above average in the top 6, 1/6, above average on the psychopathic spectrum. We all have some go-getter in us. 67% is average. Okay, 1/6 are lower than average, and 1/6 are above average. And when we're talking about go-getters, they're in the upper 6. Regulators are driven by the desire for order. They're non-neurotic and unemotional. So these people, if they've got the high desire for order, they're in the bottom 6 because they're below average in the neurotic spectrum. 2 big things about the regulator component: it's soluble. You drink, it disappears or it weakens. And the other components basically come out because this acts as a controlling factor on the other 6. The other thing is your regulator, as you get older, it increases with age. Your regulator gets stronger and stronger. You become less neurotic, which of course is, so not everyone, of course. Some people enter a second childhood and the neuroticism reemerges. They're more controlled by their emotions, but that's the real, the message It's below average on the neurotic spectrum. It's soluble and it increases with age. Artists, these are people who are driven by the desire to create. They're individualistic. They beat to a different drum, and they're above average on the autistic spectrum. Similarly, socializers are driven by the desire to communicate. They're extroverts, and they're above average on the manic spectrum. So that's where they fit in, right? Then we go to the next component, politicians. They're driven by the desire to win. These are the type A people. They're competitive and assertive, and they're above average on the paranoid spectrum. Then we go to engineers. Their big desire is to complete projects. These people are incredibly conscientious, right? And they're above average on the obsessive compulsive spectrum. Double checkers, they're driven by the desire of security. These people are very agreeable, very pleasant, but they're risk adverse, driven by the desire to security, and they're above average on the depressive spectrum. And that finishes off the 7 components. And this little chart here shows you the 7. And as you can see on here, this is the go-getter here. And these people are basically on the, only 14% of the population is in the top one, has a top 6. The 2 popular components, probably the most popular, are the socializer, driven by mania, and then the engineer, driven by the obsessive compulsive disorder. And this test was done, this is a component distribution based on 65,000 people. So let's move on now, and we're going to go into look at some classic EQ advice. 4 traits of an emotionally intelligent person. And what they said is that the emotionally intelligent person is open-minded, has the ability to handle criticism well, self-motivated, and they've achieved a work-life balance, which is all to the good. I actually agree with this, but you know, that's nice to know, but how do you do it? How do you actually lift it, right? And this is 5 ways to increase your emotional intelligence. Well, slow down and feel your feelings, learn to reduce accumulated negative emotions, communicate your challenging emotions to key trusted people, which is, you know, good advice, right? Observe your internal and external reactions to others, and learn to trust yourself over time. Well, again, this is good, but it really isn't giving you a framework for analysis. Whereas I'm saying, learn what your dominant components are on the 7MTF, and that's going to teach you basically what your emotions are. If you've got, for example, more double checker than the average person, you're going to have much more negative emotions, right? And we'll talk about how you get to control those. And you know, if you've got a framework for analysis, that is really helpful. This was another nice list: 9 habits of emotionally intelligent people. They're relentlessly positive. Well, I'm not so sure about that. All right, they have a robust emotional vocabulary, whatever that means. They're assertive. They're curious to other people. They forgive, but they don't forget. They won't let anyone limit their joy. They make things fun. They're difficult to offend, and they quash negative self-talk. Now, actually, I'd say to you, you'll learn a bit more about this in a moment, but if you understand the 7MTF, you will say, well, this is the profile effectively of someone who's got a lot of socializer component in their personality, plus a lot of politician, especially they forgive, but they don't forget. That's high P. Relentless positive is high M. Sorry, high socializer instead of high mover, right? I'm just doing the getting across. Okay, they're difficult to offend. Well, actually, that's not quite true. Socializers don't get offended, but P's certainly do. They forgive, but they don't forget. So there's a sort of inconsistency even in this list, right? They're difficult to offend, but they forgive, but they don't forget. I mean, you know, and say, okay, but this, again, we're seeing also another part of this emotional intelligence, always talking about emotional intelligent people are positive, right? Well, I can argue with that, but we'll move on, right? Finally, a classic emotional intelligence advice is develop mindfulness, and typically you develop that through meditation. I just love this image because it's got sort of the 7 chakras on it, and What is mindfulness is defined as paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. Now, I've got first to admit, I've never been one who's been into meditation. I actually lived in a commune in London. I've sort of bought with this other chap, and I got hold of this flat on old, incredibly good value in ultra west Hampstead, known to other people as Kilburn, and it was pretty cheap. And I lived there from effectively 6 years, but 2 years out because I was overseas. But when I did my MBA, and it was effectively a commune, and I was the capitalist at one end of the world. The other people living there and their friends were all into sort of, well, it was the 60s, sort of meditation, all the Indian guru stuff, Gurdjieff. Okay, they were all smoking pot. We were dropping LSD. It was the 60s, right? What else did I say? It was fantastic. I just found I couldn't meditate. I mean, I just had too much to do in life, right? And they talk about it. I just had things I wanted to do. I was, doing my MBA. I was just sort of busy. So all I want to say is, if you can turn it on and you're going to wake those chakras, away you go. But yeah, that's basically, I'm not into it. However, I have to say that when I first learned about the Hum, everything changed about learning other people. Now, if we're talking about self-management, there's three sort of biases you have to remember. First of all, there's the illusion of superiority, or sometimes known as the above average effect. This is the one where 95% of the population believes they have a better than average sense of humor. I live in a suburb in Sydney called Mossman. Regarded by many people as probably the most attractive suburb to live in Sydney, if not Australia. And one of my great lines is, I'd just love to meet a below average child in Mossman. Every parent, there's a lot of type A in them, all think that, of course, their child is above average. So that's one. You've got to remember, and this applies to yourself, that you have all 7 components in you, and at least 3 are probably going to be within plus or minus 1 standard deviation. Another bias that people have is the projection bias. They think that everyone is like me. This is what I suffered from until I first learned about the Humm-Wadsworth in 1973. And then I realized how different we all are. Okay, and this is very common about people who are highly task orientated, right? Finally, there's another bias, is trait description. I vary, but you stay the same. Once I've sort of described you, I think you're like that all the time. Now, what happens, of course, in fact, is you do vary. There are times when, for example, my A is low, my artist. However, when I go to a gallery and look around it, my little bit of A then emerges. And that's what I've said. Similarly, when I'm looking at investments, my Doublechecker is low, but I'm conscious that my Doublechecker is low. And I say, no, I have to look at risk. And what I do is I make sure I get a checklist of the various types of risk. And when I'm looking at an investment, I go down the checklist. I'm just trying to give you some examples where you do change your behavior. So, self-management, how do we achieve this? Well, I always think one of the great examples is self-management is to go to the Oracle at Delphi. Delphi, of course, was the center of Greece. And at the temple there, they had the 2 great commandments of Greek. The 2 great, just like ours is driven by the, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, the Greek was, the 2 commands were, one was know thyself, and the second command is everything in moderation. And in a way, that's the great commands of self-management. Self yourself, and basically, and self-management is to do everything in moderation. So, everything in moderation, how do you do it? Well, first of all, you build your regulator. You build your regulator component. You say, I'm going to act more conservatively. I'm going to get older. I'm going to keep moderate. Second, you understand your hot buttons. And then finally, you look at the suggestions for self-development. So let's go through them. Okay, go-getter. What are the hot buttons? Well, this is what really irritates go-getters. If you ignore them and you're indifferent to the quality of their work, if you look down on them or trivialize their activities, they get upset. Acting unprofessionally or being sloppy at work or play. Go-getters believe that they're winners in life and that winners are not sloppy. And finally, if you're secretive or evasive. Now, of course, go-getters are secretive and evasive, and they do try to manipulate you. And because they do, ours are sometimes exactly secretive or evasive. They pick it up in a flash. So actually, the best way to go there is actually be quite open with them and say, this is the situation. And don't be afraid of getting into conflict situations. They don't actually mind that. But if you say to them, no, but you have to act and dress like a winner, and if they feel you're a winner, then they'll listen to you. Regulators, okay, criticizing them. They don't like that. They actually think, deep down, because they're perfectionists and they're very into process, and they're very ethical. If you criticize them, you got to make sure, if you need to do so, you say their mistake was atypical. Okay. Secondly, never question their integrity. They get really upset with that. And acting inconsistently is basically just normal. They always look to believe in precedent. And finally, never be late for a meeting with a regulator. Okay, they hate people who lack punctuality. Never being punctual. And the way to handle them with meetings is effectively, in terms of social skills we'll learn later, is when you meet with them, set an agenda, and then finish with an action plan. Artists. Well, artists are individualists. They beat to a different drum, but they do it. They're highly introverted, right? They're very creative. And so making them the center of attention they don't like it. Being crude or insensitive, using loud behavior, okay? Ignoring their feelings or destroying their moods, and forcing them to be confrontational or aggressive. They're not good at confrontation. They don't like it. In fact, they believe to get along, you go along. Now, that isn't true, right? But, don't make them the center. If you're going to meet them, don't have them in a group meeting. Meet them one-on-one. Okay, don't swear, be noisy or loud, right? And another thing to do with artists, I know this sounds crazy, is avoid eye contact. They don't like you boring and looking at them. You look away, look outside, use visual words and look at the view. And work side by side with them, for example, on a whiteboard. This is a technique, right? Socializers. Now, socializers are very open, enthusiastic, chatty people. So one thing you want to do is restrict their freedom or their choices. Don't be pessimistic or negative. They hate nitpickers, right? So they're the ones into positive psychology. And what you have to do is, when they come up with ideas, is act enthusiastic and say, that's absolutely brilliant. The team is going to love it. Fantastic. And with regard to teams, if you refuse to pull your weight as a member of the team, they don't like it. That's one thing that really irritates them. So these are the sort of choices. You got to be optimistic, enthusiastic, and a total team player. Politicians, right? What can you do with politicians? Well, first thing is, remember, they love making decisions. You can't tell them what they can or cannot do. Trying to get the advantage over them is something that also is a hot button they don't like, even though they do it all the time to other people. Finally, acting indecisively and not accepting responsibility. Politicians are decisive, and they like decisive people. And if you sit there and go, oh, I don't know, the choice is too hard, I have to think about it, they don't like that. You have to say, no, this is what we should do, and it's got to work, and it's up to me, and I'll take responsibility for it. Engineers, they are very logical people, very practical people, very hands-on, and they don't like people who act or think emotionally, and particularly those who have a closed mind. One thing that really irritates engineers, if you criticize their expertise and then demonstrate incompetence yourself. That's just, they just look at you and think, I don't want to know. Another thing, engineers, don't make surprise visits or give them some tasks and monitor them closely. The great thing about engineers is you can say, this is what I want you to do, get them to agree on a project, set out a project plan, and then just leave them alone. They'll do it. They're very, very good at working through a project plan and getting there. And then finally, okay, taking them for the double checkers, the worst thing you can do with double checkers is taking them for granted. especially for getting to thank them. If they've done something, make sure you say, well, that's brilliant, well done. Not including them in group activities or overlooking them, and trying to quickly introduce new ideas that may affect their security. Anything new, they complain about the present all the time, but anything new that happens that they worry about. So that's sort of like, so what you want to do is give them a suggestion, let them think about it, say if you've got any objections, discuss them, slowly go through them, work out why they're not really a problem, and you basically make a double checker a lot happier and more willing to adopt the change. So that's the hot buttons. Now look at the success habits. And this is one of the things that if you've got these components in you, you generally have, most people have generally, as I say in the self-analysis section last month, generally have two. So remember, self-worth comes from within, not by chasing the attention of others. Give as much attention as you receive. Hustlers try to cut corner, skirt the edge of the law, be truthful and ethical, right? And the other thing they should do is deliver their spiritual society. And that's why meditation, in fact, is a good thing for go-getters to take up, right? Go-getters should stop feeling jealous of others and having grandiose expectations of yourself. So it's very good getting into it. And that's something that you find often is that go-getters, when they become successful, in fact, effectively start getting interested in ethics and meditation. And I can think of several people in Australia who've become wealthy and then basically go, well, I say, go a bit alternatives. Regulators, they are perfectionists, so what they've got to do is allow people to be as they are and let them make decisions of themselves. Don't expect people to change immediately. Don't try to put order on your own irrationality. Not everyone is objective as you. And regulators have to learn to relax. You can't spend your whole time trying to fix the world. Remember, the best is good enough. The best you can do is good enough. You can't do better than that. Artist, this is actually quite interesting. I think there's some great sayings in here. Remember, the more you seek peace of mind by avoiding conflict, the more likely you are to have conflict with others. Artists tend to avoid conflict, and the reality is it then builds up. Another thing they've got to develop is not pay so much attention to their feelings, especially negative ones. You get self-esteem by going through positive experiences, doing well. And finally, if you make a career of being different and trying to discover yourself, your self-indulgence will mean you'll never find yourself. And what is amazing, I mean, you read this about people, you know, on the internet. I mean, people spend years saying, well, I was trying to find myself. Well, I think that's quite self-indulgent. In fact, you're much better, as I said, getting involved in projects, sort of work or basically charity or something that you can look back and say, right, that was good. I'm fantastic. I'm glad I've done that. Socializers, I think this is they tend to be impulsive. They're energetic and enthusiastic people. So they've got to get into the habit of observing their impulses and not rather than acting on them immediately. Find ways of giving rather than getting. Fulfill what comes not from getting happiness, but from relationships. Couldn't agree more. And seizing the moment. Socializers are interesting. They tend to have lots of acquaintances, but few close friends. And one thing they want to do is develop some close friends who they can talk to. And finally, again, this, you know, to get along, you go along. It's not true. Going along with others all the time does not lead to good relationships. If you're only communicating one way, that tends to fail. Politicians, remember, the more you try to fight society's constraints and try to be independent, the less likely you are to achieve your goals. You got to work with society and change it. This is a very good one. Of all the types, you can do the most harm and the most good. By which do you want to be remembered? And don't take action too quickly. Politicians are decisive people. They make quick decisions. They don't see themselves as being impulsive. But the reality is, and this was a big message for me, and it is a habit I've developed, You don't take action too quickly. You show real power when you show self-restraint and compassion. And now engineers, what they've got to do is they get involved in the project and they're so intensive on it. They want to learn to relax, do this by exercise, not drinks or drugs. Engineers are very good at understanding things. What they should do is use that understanding to identify with people. And in fact, of all the components I've found using the 7MTF, it's engineers who really love it because they see it as a very systematic way of analyzing people. And so it's in the same way they analyze systems and look at things, how people work, how things work, they use the 7MTF to basically using people. Also share your feelings. Before you take constructive action, ask for advice from people you trust. Finally, double checkers. Well, the simple thing about life is the greatest tragedy of all is to feel that at the end of life you've missed the boat. Carpe diem. Don't be anxious about your anxieties. A good thing to remember is anxiety can be energizing. Okay, resist the tendency to blame others and try some optimism, right? Don't build too much safety into your environment. Remember, the only constant in the world is change. And I just love this line, to the man who is afraid, everything rustles, right? And I think that's a very true statement, that they see problems in everything. Now, what happens, of course, is occasionally the guess is right, but lots of times they guess wrong, and it doesn't work out the way they do. So you can worry. The current rugby coach of Australia had a great saying. They said, playing the All Blacks, are you at rugby? And of course, the All Blacks, easily the best rugby team in the world and continue to be so. And he said, are you worried about playing the All Blacks? And he said, no. And his great line was, worry is a wasted emotion. You just etc. And that's in fact a truism I think you just got to remember. That worry is a wasted emotion. Things change, and you've got to carve seeds of the day. So, knowing yourself, everything in moderation, the 2 commands. Know your 7MTF profile. So learn what your dominant components are. Build your regulator, right? Learn what your hot buttons are. What are the behavior that irritates you? And then learn what are your suggestions for self-development. Sort of go back to those 2 slides once you've done your analysis of yourself. Finally, I thought this is, as we're talking about mindfulness meditation, I just came across this, and I said it was a great list. It said, you can always be cheerful, ignoring aches and pains. If you can risk complaining and boring people with your troubles. If you can eat the same food and be grateful for it. If you can understand when your loved ones are too busy to give you any time. And if you can take criticism and blame without resentment, if you can conquer tension without medical help, if you can relax without alcohol, and finally, if you can sleep without drugs, well, who are you? What are you? And I thought the great line, the punchline of this is, then you're probably the family dog. And here's the family dog in a meditation pose, right? And I thought it was a lovely advice just at the end. I'm going to finish on that note. It says, handle every stressful situation like a dog. If you can't eat it play with it, wee on it, and walk away. And I just thought it was just an amusing way to end the seminar, because we can't always achieve that, of course, as a study. But again, okay, getting everything and learning everything, motivation, learning self-control. That's my big message. It is possible. You can, while you can't change your personality, you can in fact change your behavior.